Some women are broken by the lies told about them. Others are forged by them. Elena Marconi walked into a room full of people who had already decided she was guilty. No evidence, no trial, just Vivian Valenti's word. And in this family, that word was law. The necklace was gone. The blame had a face. And that face belonged to the woman who had spent 4 years trying to earn a place in a world that never wanted her. Tonight, they were going to throw her out like she was nothing. But Elena Marconi was not nothing, and she was done pretending otherwise. If you're watching this story for the first time, hit that like button right now and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me until the very end, because what happens inside these walls will change everything you think you know about loyalty, power, and the price of telling the truth. The gates of the Valenti estate stood 14 feet tall, wrought iron twisted into decorative scrolls that looked elegant from a distance and looked like a cage from the inside. Elena had learned that distinction the hard way. She'd driven through those gates for the first time 4 years ago, sitting in the passenger seat of Adrian's car, wearing a dress she'd bought with money she'd saved from 3 months of overtime at the architectural firm where she used to work. She remembered thinking the estate was beautiful. She remembered thinking she was lucky. She didn't think that anymore. Tonight she stood in the main corridor of the East Wing, her back straight, her hands loose at her sides, and her face carefully emptied of every emotion she actually felt. The corridor was long and lit by sconces that threw warm amber light across the marble floor, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it was. Framed photographs lined the walls, Valenti family history going back 3 generations. Men in suits, women in pearls, nobody smiling the way people smile when they mean it. Vivian Valenti was at the far end of the corridor, standing in the open doorway of the family drawing room, and she was looking at Elena the way you look at something you're deciding whether to throw away. She was 61 years old, narrow at the shoulders, with silver hair pulled back tight enough to look like it hurt. She wore black because she wore black every day, not for mourning, just for effect. Her jewelry was understated and genuine. Her posture was the posture of a woman who had spent decades making other people feel small and had gotten very good at it. Behind Vivian, the drawing room was full. Elena could see them from where she stood. The family's senior men arranged around the room like a formal inquest, which is exactly what this was. Marcus Kane, Adrian's second, standing by the fireplace with his arms crossed and his expression giving nothing away. Dominic Reyes, who handled the family's western territory, sitting in the leather chair nearest the window and not bothering to look up. 3 others whose names Elena knew, but whose faces had always been politely hostile toward her. And in the center of the room, standing rather than sitting, because Adrian Valenti never sat when a room was waiting on him. Adrian. He was looking at her. He was always looking at her lately, but not the way he used to. The way he looked at her used to feel like something solid. Warm. Weight she wanted on her. Now it felt like assessment, like he was adding up columns in his head and not liking the sum. He was 6 feet and some change, dark-haired, broad through the shoulders, with a face that photographers would have called striking and people who knew him called unreadable. He wore a gray shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was 40 years old and he looked it in the way that men who've carried heavy things since they were young start to look it. Not older exactly, but denser. Like pressure had compressed him into something harder than bone. Elena walked toward the drawing room. She didn't hurry. Hurrying would look like guilt, and she was done accommodating other people's suspicions. Elena. Vivian said her name the way she said everything, with the faint implication that the syllables tasted bad in her mouth. Come in. We've been waiting. I know. Elena stepped past her into the room. I was told 8 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock. Vivian closed the door behind her with a soft, deliberate click. The room smelled like wood smoke and old leather, and the particular kind of expensive whiskey that Adrian's family treated like a sacrament. A fire burned in the stone hearth, even though it wasn't that cold outside. Vivian liked fires. She liked the way they made people sweat. On the mahogany table at the center of the room sat an open jewelry case. Velvet interior, midnight blue. Empty. Elena looked at it. She looked at it long enough to make sure everyone in the room saw her look at it without flinching. Then she looked at Adrian, Tell me what this is, she said. It was Vivian who answered. Of course it was. The Valenti necklace, Vivian said, moving to stand beside the table, one hand resting near the empty case with a proprietary lightness. Given to my mother-in-law on her wedding day, passed to me when my husband died. Worth, in terms of money, approximately $400,000. In terms of what it means to this family, it is worth considerably more. She paused. It was in this case 3 days ago. It is not in this case now. Okay, Elena said. And? The room shifted. Dominic Reyes looked up from the window. Vivian's chin lifted a fraction of an inch. And I believe you took it. The silence that followed that sentence was the specific silence of a room full of people who'd already been told what to think and were waiting to see how the accused responded. Elena breathed, slow, steady, through her nose. She was aware of her own heartbeat, too fast, but not visible. She was aware of Adrian across the room, his stillness, his watchfulness, the way he was holding himself very carefully apart from the moment. That's an interesting belief, Elena said. What makes you hold it? You were in this wing Tuesday evening. You were seen. I was in this wing because my husband's study is in this wing. I walked past this room. I didn't enter it. No one can confirm that. No one can confirm I did enter it either. That's how hallways work. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something tightened around her eyes. You've never respected what this family is, what it has built. You came here from nothing, a salary, a small apartment. You saw what Adrian had and you positioned yourself accordingly. That's a story, Elena said quietly. It's not my story, but I've heard you tell it enough times that I understand you believe it. Elena, Adrian's voice from across the room, low, controlled. Warning or protection, she couldn't always tell anymore. I'm answering the accusation, Elena said without looking away from Vivian. I didn't take the necklace. I have never touched the necklace. I didn't know where it was kept until 30 seconds ago when your mother pointed at that case. The case is kept in the East Corridor cabinet, Vivian said, which you pass every time you walk from the main staircase to Adrian's study. Knowing a piece of furniture exists is not the same as stealing from it. Elena. Adrian again. This time she looked at him. His face was doing what it did when he was managing something he didn't know how to manage. The jaw set, the eyes flat, everything controlled except for a single line between his brows that deepened when he was working hard to keep himself together. Go upstairs, he said. I'm not going upstairs. The room went very still. Adrian looked at her the way he looked at people who surprised him, not with anger exactly, but with a recalibration happening behind his eyes. Most people did what he said. Most people moved when Adrian Valenti told them to move. Elena, I'm not going upstairs so this room can have a conversation about me without me in it, she said. If your family wants to accuse me of stealing, they can do it while I'm standing here, and I can respond. That's the only version of this I'm participating in. Dominic Reyes put down his glass. Marcus Kane uncrossed his arms. Vivian watched Elena with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost, respect. She covered it immediately. You have no standing to make demands in this room, Vivian said. I'm Adrian's wife. I have every standing. Elena held the older woman's gaze and did not blink. I didn't take your necklace. I don't want your necklace. I want to know why you decided I did, and I want to hear that explanation in front of witnesses. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Adrian said, That's enough for tonight. Adrian, enough. His voice was still quiet, but it had the particular quality that quiet can have when there is enormous weight behind it. We'll deal with this properly. Tomorrow. Everyone out. The room emptied with the efficiency of people who were practiced at reading Adrian Valenti's moods and acting accordingly. Dominic Reyes and the others filed out without comment. Marcus paused at the door and looked back at Elena for a moment, not unkindly, just reading her, and then he was gone too. Vivian moved last. She gathered herself with the deliberateness of a woman who never left a room at anything other than her own pace, and she paused beside Elena on her way out. I know what you are, Vivian said very softly. For Elena's ears only, I've been watching women like you my entire life. You find men with power. You study them. You make yourself necessary until you're impossible to remove. Then you start taking. Elena said nothing. You think silence is dignity, Vivian continued. It isn't. It's just silence, and it won't save you. She left. The door clicked shut behind her. Elena stood alone with Adrian and the empty jewelry case and the fire that kept burning whether anyone needed it or not. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Did you? Adrian asked. Elena turned and looked at her husband, really looked at him. At the exhaustion he kept banded down, at the thing behind his eyes that she used to be able to name and now couldn't, at the man she'd married in a small ceremony 4 years ago with no guests from his family, because Vivian had made it understood that her presence would constitute an endorsement she was unwilling to give. No, Elena said. He looked at her. He was trying to read her the way he read everyone, looking for the tells, the small inconsistencies, the places where performance and truth didn't line up. She let him look. She had nothing to hide, and she was tired of behaving as though she did. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. That's it? Okay. I don't know what else to say tonight. You could say you believe me. His jaw moved. I said, okay. That's not the same thing. He turned away from her and moved toward the window, putting distance between them in the way he did when he needed to think and couldn't think with her too close. She understood this about him. It had once felt like a kind of trust, that she knew the physical language of his uncertainty. Now it just felt like distance. Go to bed, he said. I'll sort this out. Elena looked at the empty jewelry case one more time, then she left the room. She did not go to bed. She went to the East Wing corridor, stood where she'd stood 100 times, walking to and from Adrian's study, and looked at the cabinet built into the wall 6 feet from the drawing room door. Dark wood, antique brass handles, the kind of furniture that was designed to be seen without being noticed. She had walked past it dozens of times. She had never opened it. She had never had a reason to open it. She tried to remember Tuesday evening. The corridor had been quiet. She'd walked from the main staircase. She'd taken the east staircase, actually, not the main one, because she'd come up from the kitchen and the east stairs were closer. She had not walked past this cabinet. She had not been on this side of the corridor at all, which meant Vivian's claim that she'd been seen walking past the cabinet was either a mistake or a lie. Elena stood very still in the empty corridor and thought about which of those was more likely. Then she went to find the head of household security, a careful man named Petrov, who had worked for the Valentis for 11 years, and who Elena had spent 4 of those years being quietly and consistently respectful toward, because she understood that in this house, the people Vivian dismissed were often the people who mattered most. She found him in the security office on the ground floor, a small room behind the kitchen that smelled like coffee and electronics. He was reviewing something on a monitor when she knocked on the open door. Mrs. Valenti, he said, and began to stand. Don't get up. She stepped inside. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if the truth is uncomfortable. Petrov settled back into his chair. He was a thick-necked man in his mid-50s with a gray buzz cut and the careful stillness of someone who had learned to be a very good observer. He looked at Elena the way he looked at most things, measuring, patient. What do you want to know? He asked. Tuesday evening, between 7 and 9. Who accessed the East Corridor? Petrov's expression didn't change. That's a question I'd normally need Mr. Valenti's authorization to answer. I know, I'm asking anyway. A pause. He turned slightly toward his monitor, then back to her. The logs for that period, he said carefully, are not currently available. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not surprise, but the surprise was already past. What she felt now was colder than surprise, more useful. Not available, she repeated, meaning deleted, meaning not currently available. When did they become unavailable? Another pause, longer this time. Petrov was doing something behind his eyes, like weighing something, deciding something. Then he said, This morning, before you were summoned to the drawing room. Elena held that information very carefully, the way you hold something fragile and dangerous at the same time. Thank you, Petrov. Mrs. Valenti. He said her name with a particular weight, and when she turned back at the door, he was looking at her directly. There are other systems, he said, older ones. Before the upgrade 3 years ago, the estate ran a secondary recording system for the exterior approaches. Technically, it was supposed to be decommissioned. Technically. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned back to his monitor. Elena walked out of the security office and stood in the narrow hallway behind the kitchen, alone, with the sound of the estate settling around her and the understanding arriving. Not like a shock, because it wasn't a shock, but like the confirmation of something she'd already suspected sitting down somewhere deep in her body and deciding to stay. The logs had been deleted. Before the accusation had even been formally made, the evidence had been removed. Someone had planned this. She climbed the back stairs to the second floor slowly, one hand on the railing, running through the geometry of what she knew. Vivian had made the accusation. The security logs covering the relevant window had been wiped. The only witness claim was that Elena had been seen in the corridor, which Vivian had stated without naming a witness, which meant either the witness would be produced later, controlled and coached, or there was no witness, and Vivian was simply gambling on her own credibility against Elena's, which was, Elena had to admit, not a bad gamble. In this house, in this family, Vivian's credibility was the foundation everything else was built on. If you undermined it, you weren't just challenging one woman's account of one night. You were challenging the entire architecture of power that the Valenti family ran on. That was what Vivian was counting on, that Elena would be too afraid to push back that hard. She was going to miscalculate. Elena reached the second-floor corridor. She could see light under the door of Adrian's study. He'd gone there rather than upstairs, which meant he was working through something. He did that. Turned to work when the personal became unmanageable. She'd learned not to take it personally. She'd learned a lot of things in 4 years that she'd had to specifically train herself not to take personally. She stopped outside the study door. She thought about knocking. She thought about going in and laying out everything she'd just learned. The deleted logs, the secondary system, the timing of it all. She decided against it. Not because she didn't trust Adrian. She did trust Adrian's sets. Not blindly, not without the small fractures that 4 years of living in his mother's shadow had put in the foundation, but she trusted him. The problem wasn't Adrian. The problem was that if she went to him now with theory and suggestion and the cryptic word of a security officer who hadn't technically said anything at all, Vivian would find out. Vivian always found out. And whatever was in that secondary recording system would be gone by morning. Elena went to her bedroom, their bedroom, technically, the large suite at the end of the north wing that she'd spent 2 years slowly making livable, replacing the cold surfaces Vivian had chosen with things that felt like a place 2 people actually lived. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and thought very carefully. She needed the footage from the secondary system before anyone else knew she was looking for it. She needed to know who had deleted the primary logs and when. And she needed to do all of this without appearing to do any of it, because in this house, the way you moved was as visible as what you did, and Vivian had eyes in every room that Elena had never been able to fully map. She lay back on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, and let herself feel, just for a moment, just in the dark where no one could see, the full weight of what was happening to her. The slow, calculated humiliation of it, the precision of it. Vivian hadn't just accused her of theft. She'd chosen an accusation that struck at exactly what Elena had always been most vulnerable to, the suggestion that she'd married Adrian for what he had, rather than who he was. That she was transactional, that underneath the marriage and the 4 years and the life they'd built together, she was just a woman running a long con. It was a lie. But it was a well-chosen lie, the kind that worked because it was shaped like a question that other people would already be asking quietly. She thought about the way Adrian had said, "Okay," and turned toward the window. She thought about the way he hadn't said, "I believe you." The ceiling above her was white and smooth and completely unhelpful. She closed her eyes and thought, find the footage. That's the first thing. Everything else comes after. In the morning, she would begin. The morning came hard and gray, the kind of November light that came through the tall windows of the north wing like something apologizing. Elena was dressed before 6 and moving through the house before most of the staff had fully started. She had calculated that the secondary security system, if it still existed the way Petrov had implied, would likely be maintained somewhere in the older part of the estate, the section that predated the renovation 3 years ago, which Vivian had overseen and which had, by most accounts, been as much about restructuring the house's surveillance as about the aesthetics. The older section of the estate was the West Wing, Vivian's wing. Of course it was. Elena walked to breakfast as though breakfast were her only concern. She sat at the long dining table and ate what was brought to her and responded pleasantly to the 2 household staff members who crossed her path, because she had learned very early that in this house, the household staff were not furniture, and she had always treated them accordingly. This had not made her popular with Vivian, who preferred that the people working for her feel the specific discomfort of being simultaneously necessary and invisible. But it had made Elena something that Vivian's approach had not known, remembered, regarded. After breakfast, she found Carla, the head housekeeper, in the linen room off the main pantry. Carla was 63, Cuban-born, with 17 years in this house, and the careful watchfulness of someone who had survived multiple versions of Valenti family drama by virtue of being extremely competent and strategically unobtrusive. She and Elena had never had a friendship exactly. Carla maintained careful professional distance with everyone, but they had an understanding. Elena noticed things. So did Carla. They had, over 4 years, developed a habit of occasionally noticing things in each other's presence, without either of them making a production of it. "Morning, Carla." "Mrs. Valenti?" Carla didn't look up from the inventory she was working through. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." Elena leaned against the doorframe. "I was thinking about the West Wing. Vivian mentioned last month that the humidity in the reading room was damaging some of the older pieces. I want to take a look." Carla's hands paused for just a fraction of a second on the linen she was folding. "The West Wing reading room is in Mrs. Valenti's private area. Vivian's out this morning. She has her appointment with the lawyers downtown." Elena let that sit. "I'm not going to touch anything. I just want to look at the room and see if it's something we should bring in a conservator for. The paintings in there are irreplaceable." Another pause. Carla looked at her, a direct, measuring look, and then went back to the linen. "The reading room key is on the West Wing maintenance ring," Carla said, "which is kept in the second drawer of the housekeeper's station. Same place it's always been." She said nothing else. She went back to counting pillowcases. Elena said, "Thank you," and left. The West Wing reading room smelled like old paper and lavender sachets and a very faint trace of Vivian's perfume, the kind of expensive scent that lingered in rooms long after its wearer had left. Books covered 3 walls, floor to ceiling, real books, older books, the kind of library assembled over generations rather than purchased as decor. A mahogany writing desk sat near the window, 2 armchairs, a settee, a fireplace that had been converted to gas, and along the interior wall, partially hidden behind an oak bookcase that had been shifted 3 inches off the wall on one side, the kind of shift that looked like settling but wasn't, a door. Elena had not known this door existed. She moved the bookcase further from the wall. It was heavy but mounted on casters, deliberately so, and it moved without much resistance. The door behind it was old, solid wood, with a simple lock, the kind that predated the estate's renovation by at least 30 years. The key on the maintenance ring she was carrying was modern. It wouldn't fit. She stood and looked at the lock. Then she looked around the room. In the writing desk, 3rd drawer on the right, she found nothing useful. 2nd drawer, a magnifying glass, 2 fountain pens, a small leather notebook that she did not open, and underneath all of that, beneath a false bottom that yielded to pressure applied to the front left corner, an older key. Iron, simple. The kind you keep hidden because it opens something you don't want found. Elena stood very still for a moment. She was aware of how deep she was in Vivian's territory. She was aware of the risk of what came next. She put the key in the lock and turned it. The door opened onto a narrow passage, barely wide enough to walk through, that ran parallel to the reading room for about 20 feet before opening into a small room that was not on any floor plan Elena had ever seen. It was a monitoring room. Small, climate-controlled, smelling of electronics and old air. One wall held shelving with recording equipment, old and new both, a hybrid system that spoke to something assembled over time rather than installed all at once. A single monitor, dormant but not disconnected. A hard drive unit with an indicator light that glowed steady red. Active. Archiving. Elena sat down in front of the monitor and looked at what Vivian had been watching for years. The feeds were organized by location. 14 cameras total, not the modern system, the older one, the one that was supposed to have been decommissioned. It covered the east corridor, the drawing room, the main staircase, the entry hall, Adrian's study exterior, and 7 other locations throughout the estate that told a very clear story about what Vivian considered worth monitoring. Elena found Tuesday evening in the archive without difficulty. The timestamp, the location, east corridor. She loaded the file and watched. The corridor was empty. The corridor was empty. The corridor was Vivian walking briskly from the direction of the drawing room toward the cabinet, opening it with a key she carried in her jacket pocket, removing the jewelry case, opening it, removing the necklace, placing the necklace in her jacket pocket, closing the case, closing the cabinet, returning to the drawing room. 11 seconds. The whole thing took 11 seconds. Elena watched it 3 times. She felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief and not entirely surprise. It was something that sat between all 3 and had no good name. She had spent 4 years in this house. She had spent 4 years being measured and found wanting by this woman. She had swallowed so many small humiliations that they had built up in her body like something calcified, something that sat in her chest and made it harder to breathe than it should have been. And the whole time, this precision, this patience, the willingness to wait and construct and frame with a craftsman's care, to take your own family's heirloom and put it in your pocket to destroy the woman your son chose. Elena copied the footage to a drive she found in the equipment shelf, blank, still packaged, as though Vivian had never imagined she'd need to defend against someone using her own system against her. She put everything back the way she'd found it. She locked the door. She moved the bookcase back into position. She left the reading room exactly as she'd found it and locked it behind her and returned the keyring to the housekeeper's station. Then she went to find Petrov. He was in the security office. He looked up when she came in and did not look surprised, which meant he'd been expecting her, or expecting someone, and had already decided which side of this he was on. The secondary system, Elena said. Who else knows about it? No one who works here currently, Petrov said. The man who built it left the family's employ 8 years ago. Mrs. Valenti oversaw the renovation personally and gave specific instructions to the contractors about what was to remain and what was to be decommissioned. Some things were decommissioned, some things were not. Does she know you know about it? She knows I know many things, Petrov said carefully. She has always chosen to regard that as an asset rather than a liability. And now? He looked at her steadily. Now, I think it depends on what you found. Elena placed the drive on his desk. 11 seconds. Tuesday evening. Everything you need is on there. Petrov looked at the drive. He did not touch it. What do you intend to do with it? I intend to show it to my husband. Mrs. Valenti. He said her name again with that same weighted care. If you bring this to Mr. Valenti without preparation, if he sees it cold, without context, without understanding what he's looking at, there is a risk he will not accept it. Not because he doubts you, but because accepting it means accepting something about his mother that will be very difficult to accept. I know. Do you want me to? No. Elena picked up the drive. This is mine to do, but thank you. For everything you haven't said. Petrov nodded once, slowly, and she left. She found Adrian in the east garden, which was where he went when he was thinking and couldn't do it inside. He was walking the stone path that ran between the hedgerows, his hands in his pockets, his head down, moving with the particular focused restlessness that meant he was working through something that wouldn't resolve. He looked up when he heard her come through the garden door. His eyes went to her face, then to her hands, then back to her face. Elena, I need you to watch something, she said. She held out the drive. He looked at it. What is it? Footage from the east corridor, Tuesday evening. Something moved through his face. Where did you get footage from the east corridor? Petrov told me this morning the logs for that window were unavailable. Petrov told you the primary logs were unavailable, Elena said. They are. They were deleted. She held his gaze. There's a secondary system. Older. It wasn't decommissioned during the renovation. Adrian went very still. Adrian. She took a step toward him. Watch the footage, please. Just watch it, and then we can talk about everything else. For a long moment he didn't move. The garden was quiet around them. Late autumn, the hedgerows gone brown at the edges, the gravel pale under the gray sky. She could hear her own breathing and his, and the distant sound of the city beyond the estate's walls. Then he took the drive from her hand. They went inside together and watched it in his study. On his laptop, with the door locked and nobody else present. She watched him watch it. Watched his face as 11 seconds played out. Watched the thing in his expression that he couldn't control the way he controlled everything else. The slight recoiling, the jaw working, the stillness that went a shade too rigid to be controlled. He watched it twice, 3 times. Then he sat back and did not say anything for a long time. Elena waited. She was good at waiting. She'd had 4 years of practice. My mother, Adrian said finally. His voice was very flat. My mother took the necklace. Yes. And then He stopped. She accused me in front of your senior people. She made sure to do it publicly, in front of witnesses, before any investigation could complicate the narrative. Elena kept her voice level. Not cold, just clear. She deleted the primary security logs before she called the meeting. She had a witness story ready. She was patient about it, Adrian. This wasn't a moment of judgment. This was planned. The word planned sat in the room between them like something that had been dropped and couldn't be picked back up. Adrian pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, a gesture she'd seen from him before, only in private, only in moments of something he couldn't manage on the surface, and it was the most honest thing she'd seen from him in days. Why? He said. Not a question exactly, more like a man saying a word because saying it was the only way to start making it real. You'll have to ask her that, Elena said. Elena, I'm not guessing at your mother's motivations, she said. I could. I've spent 4 years watching her operate, and I have a lot of material to draw from. But that's a conversation between you and her, not me. He took his hands away from his face and looked at her. He looked like something was being reorganized inside him at significant cost. I should have, he started. Stopped. Started again. Last night, when you asked me to say I believed you, I should have. You should have, Elena agreed. But we're here now. He stood up. She could see him pulling himself back together, the same process she'd watched for 4 years, the careful reassembly of control over whatever was actually happening inside him. She used to find it frustrating. Right now she found it oddly comforting. He was still him, still managing, still working through it. I'm going to deal with this, he said. I know. I need to talk to Petrov. And then I need to talk to my mother. Yes. Elena. He stopped in front of her, close. She could smell him, warm, familiar, the particular combination that 4 years had made into something her body recognized before her mind caught up. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. I know. That's not enough. No, she said. It isn't, but it's a start. He left the study with the drive in his hand and the particular quality of purpose in his stride that she recognized as Adrian Valenti in the specific mode where he was about to make something happen that would not be pleasant and would not be reversible. Elena stood alone in the study for a moment. Then she sat in his chair. She put her hands flat on the surface of his desk. The leather was warm. The room smelled like him. She was still sitting there 20 minutes later when she heard the front door of the estate open and close, and Vivian's voice in the entry hall, cutting and clear, the sound of a woman who had just returned from her lawyer's appointment and had no idea what was waiting for her. Elena took a slow breath. She picked up her phone and checked the time. She set it face down on the desk. And then she listened to the sound of Vivian Valenti walking into the house she controlled, moving through the rooms she had shaped, heading toward the part of the afternoon where everything was about to come apart. And Elena waited, very still, very quiet, in the center of all of it. Because she had found the truth. and the truth was in Adrian's hands now. And the next hour would determine whether 4 years of swallowed humiliation and careful patience and refusing to become what this house wanted to make her had been worth anything at all. She heard Vivian's footsteps on the marble floor, coming closer. She heard Adrian's voice from somewhere in the direction of the drawing room, calling his mother's name. She heard the footsteps stop. And then there was silence. The specific, weighted silence of a moment that is about to become irreversible. And Elena Marconi sat in her husband's chair in the center of the family that had never wanted her, and she did not look away. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Elena counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then she heard Vivian say, "Adrian," in the particular tone that meant she had already assessed the situation and was calibrating her response. And Adrian said, "In here," and his voice had no warmth in it at all. Elena stood. She smoothed the front of her jacket. She walked out of the study and down the corridor toward the drawing room, and she did not hurry. The drawing room looked different in the afternoon light. The fire was out. Without it, the room was just a room. Expensive, yes. Carefully arranged, yes. But stripped of the theater that Vivian liked to use it for. The mahogany table was still there. The jewelry case was still there, still open, still empty. Adrian stood near the window. He'd positioned himself with his back to the light, which put his face in shadow and made it harder to read. Elena had seen him do this in business situations. She had never seen him do it with his mother. Vivian stood just inside the door. She had not fully entered the room. Her coat was still on, charcoal wool, buttoned, with the leather gloves she'd worn to her appointment still in her left hand. She was looking at her son, and she was doing the thing Elena had watched her do for years. Running calculations. Running them fast, running them deep, and keeping the process entirely invisible on her face. She noticed Elena in the doorway. Something passed across her expression. Very quick, gone before it could be identified. "You're here?" Vivian said. "It's my house," Elena said. Vivian turned back to Adrian. "Whatever she's told you. Sit down, mother." Vivian went still. In the 4 years Elena had been part of this family, she had never heard Adrian speak to his mother in that tone. Flat. Final. The tone he used for people who had used up the last of something he'd been rationing for a long time. Vivian sat. She chose the chair nearest the door, not the center of the room, not the place of authority. She sat the way a person sits when they are still deciding whether to stay. Adrian set a laptop on the table. He turned the screen toward her. He pressed play. 11 seconds. Vivian watched the footage. Elena watched Vivian. Whatever she had expected, denial prepared in advance, immediate deflection, an attack on the footage's authenticity, none of it came. Vivian watched herself take the necklace from the cabinet, pocket it, and walk away. And her face did something Elena had never seen it do. It went blank. Not the controlled blankness of performance. Something beneath that. Something older and more fundamental. The blankness of a person watching something they had believed was hidden, discovering that it is not. The footage ended. The three of them sat in the gray afternoon quiet. "Where did you get that?" Vivian said. Still not a question, a statement shaped like one. "Does it matter?" Adrian said. "Yes, it matters considerably." She pulled her eyes from the screen and looked at her son. "That system was supposed to be decommissioned," Adrian said. "I know, it wasn't." Vivian's jaw tightened. She looked at Elena. "You found it." "I looked," Elena said. "You went into my private wing. You accused me of theft in front of 15 people. I looked for evidence." Elena held the older woman's gaze without flinching. "I found it." Vivian set her gloves on the table beside her with a precise, deliberate motion, as if putting them down carefully was the only thing she could currently control. She looked back at her son. "Adrian, let me explain." "Don't." His voice cracked the air like something thrown hard against a wall. "Don't manage this. Don't do what you always do where you take the conversation and you turn it until I can't find where I came in. Just answer me straight. Did you take the necklace and blame it on my wife?" A pause. Very brief. "Yes," Vivian said. The word sat in the room like a stone dropped into water. Elena felt the ripple of it move through her chest. Not satisfaction, not triumph, not even relief. Something closer to exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of being right about something you desperately wished you'd been wrong about. Adrian turned away from his mother and stood facing the window. His back was a wall. Elena could see the tension in it, the shoulders, the spine, the fists hanging at his sides. "Why?" he said. His voice was rough now. The control was still there, but it was costing him more. Because it was necessary. He turned around. Necessary. Adrian, she is my wife. Each word separated from the next by a beat of something that was barely contained. She has been in this house for 4 years. She has done nothing to this family except exists, Vivian said sharply. She exists in this house, Adrian. She walks through it. She talks to the staff. She rearranges things. She softens things. And every time she does, you look at her instead of at what's in front of you. You look at her and you lose your edge. Her voice was precise and cold and utterly convinced. I have watched it happen. I have watched you make decisions in the last 3 years that your father would never have made. I have watched this organization lose ground it spent 20 years building. And every time I trace it back, every time I find the point where the calculation went wrong, I find her. I find her influence on you. Her softness, her civilian perspective on things that require stop. Adrian said it quietly, quieter than before, which was worse. Stop talking. Vivian stopped, but her expression did not change. She was not ashamed, Elena realized. She was frustrated. She had done what she believed was necessary, and the footage had made it impossible to sustain, and she was frustrated by that, not by what she had done. Elena felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. You've done this before, Elena said. Vivian looked at her. This isn't the first time, Elena said. You've done this before. With someone else. Something else. She watched Vivian's face and read the micro-expression that flickered and died in under a second. The thing with Marco Caruso. 2 years ago. You told Adrian that Caruso had been talking to the Delano family. Adrian cut him out. I always thought that was strange because Caruso had worked with this family for 12 years and his loyalty seemed... Elena. Adrian's voice was warning now. Was it Caruso? Elena asked Vivian directly. Vivian said nothing. Was it Caruso? Elena asked again. That's a different conversation, Vivian said. It's the same conversation, Elena said. It's exactly the same conversation. It's the conversation about how long this has been going on and how many people have been hurt by it, and what Adrian actually knows about his own organization versus what you've decided he should know. The room temperature dropped by several degrees. Not literally, it felt literal. Adrian was looking at his mother with something that was no longer anger. Anger had structure. Anger had direction. What was in his face now was more like the feeling of standing on ground you trusted and feeling it move. Marco Caruso, he said slowly. Adrian, Caruso was he talking to the Delanos? A silence. Mother. He was becoming a liability in other ways, Vivian said. Her voice had shifted. Still controlled, but the precision had a defensive edge now, a quality of someone who has been backed into a corner and is reassessing the angles. The Delano question was a simplification. A simplification, Adrian pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. You manufactured a reason to remove him. I accelerated a decision that needed to be made. That wasn't your decision to make. Adrian's hand dropped. None of this is your decision to make. This is my organization. These are my people. My wife. His voice was rising now. Not shouting. Adrian Valenti did not shout, but the volume was increasing in a way that Elena had only heard 2 or 3 times in 4 years. You have been running a parallel operation inside my house, and I have been trusting you. I have been going to you. I have been treating you like the one person in this whole structure whose judgment I didn't have to question because you were... He stopped. He was breathing hard. Vivian watched him. Her expression had shifted into something Elena could not fully read. Not guilt, not remorse, but something more complex and more painful than either of those. Something that looked, if you watched carefully, like grief, like the grief of a woman who had done what she believed was right and was now watching it cost her the one thing she actually cared about. "You are my son," Vivian said. Her voice had lost its precision. "Not much. A fraction. But it was there. Everything I have done, everything, has been to protect what you have built, to protect you. Your father built this, and then he died and left it for you, and you were 32 years old and you were not ready, and I was ready. You were 32 and you were in love with a woman you'd known for 4 months, and you were making decisions with your heart, and not your head." Vivian stood. She stood slowly, like the motion cost her something. "I did what needed to be done. What you couldn't see needed to be done, because that is what I have always done. It wasn't yours to do." "Then you should have been more careful about what you let me see," she said. "If you didn't want me involved, you should not have called me when the Tampa deal fell through. You should not have come to me when Reyes was threatening to go independent. You should not have—" She stopped herself. Reset. Her voice went quieter. "You have come to me every time it was hard, and I have helped you every time. And I have never once asked for anything in return except that you remain effective and safe and in control of what your father built." "And Elena," Adrian said. "Elena threatened that. Elena distracted you from it." "That is not the same thing." "To me it is." The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. It had weight and history in it. It had 20 years of a particular kind of love, demanding, certain, doing damage in the name of protection. And it had Adrian standing in the middle of the room with the evidence of it in his hands, and it had Elena standing in the doorway watching a family discover something true about itself that could not be undiscovered. Marcus Kane appeared in the corridor behind Elena. He'd come from somewhere in the East Wing. She hadn't heard him approach. And he stopped when he saw the configuration of people in the room. His eyes moved from Vivian to Adrian to Elena and back to Adrian, and he read it the way Marcus always read things, completely, quickly, without expression. "Marcus," Adrian said, "I need you. I can come back." "No. In here." Marcus came into the room and stood near Elena. He was 6 feet even, mid-40s, with dark skin and a deliberate stillness that Elena had always thought was one of the more genuinely impressive things she'd encountered in this family's orbit. He looked at the laptop screen, still open to the footage, the timestamp visible, and he looked at Vivian, and he said nothing. "I need to know what you know," Adrian said to him. "About Caruso. About any other decisions my mother has influenced through channels I didn't authorize." Marcus was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man deciding how honest to be. "Marcus," Adrian's voice, steady, "I need to know what you know." "Caruso," Marcus said. "I had questions at the time. The Delano information came through a source I couldn't verify and couldn't trace. I flagged it. You were told the flag was cleared. It wasn't? It went to your mother for clearance. She told me she'd discussed it with you." Adrian closed his eyes, opened them. "She didn't discuss it with me." "No," Marcus said. "I understand that now." "What else?" Marcus was quiet again. Elena watched the calculation moving behind his careful face, the weighing of loyalty against accuracy, the specific difficulty of a man who had served a structure and was now being asked to map the places where that structure had been compromised. "There was a meeting," Marcus said, 14 months ago, between your mother and Thomas Park." The name hit the room like a physical thing. Elena saw Adrian's posture change, a subtle stiffening, a settling into something harder. Thomas Park was the name that appeared on the edges of several things that had gone wrong for the Valenti family over the previous 2 years, deals that fell through at the last moment, partnerships that dissolved without clear reason, information that seemed to surface with other organizations at inconvenient times. Thomas Park was, in the most precise sense, a problem that had never been fully located. "What meeting?" Adrian said. "The restaurant on Carver Street, privately arranged. Your mother and Park and a third person I couldn't identify. 90 minutes. Marcus paused. "I only know because I was there for a separate reason, and I saw her. I didn't report it because I didn't know what I was looking at, and I wasn't certain what reporting it would. You didn't trust what I'd do with it, Adrian said flatly. Marcus held his gaze. I didn't trust the information would reach you without going through someone who might change it. The implication was not subtle. The implication landed in the room, and nobody looked at anybody else for a moment. Vivian's face had gone very still. The calculation was happening behind it at speed. Elena could feel it the way you feel weather changing, a pressure shift, something moving in the atmosphere of the room. Thomas Park is not your enemy, Vivian said. Mother. He is a rational actor with interests that are not entirely opposed to ours. I explored a conversation, that's all it was. An exploration. A private conversation, Adrian said. With a man I have been actively working to locate and assess for 14 months. Who you knew I was looking for. Who you... He stopped, pressed his hand flat against the table. Did you tell him I was looking for him? Adrian, did you warn him? The silence was answer enough. Elena watched the thing happen in Adrian's face. The thing she had seen him suppress in every difficult moment she'd witnessed. The thing he managed and controlled and kept from surfacing, because surfacing it would cost him something. She watched it stop being suppressible. She watched it move through his expression like a fault line shifting. Not destruction, not collapse, but a permanent change in the underlying structure. He looked at his mother and she looked back at him, and between them was everything. Everything the two of them had built, everything Vivian had decided was worth protecting, everything that had just been made impossible to unknow. Get out of the house, Adrian said. Vivian stood very straight. This is my home. This is my home. Get out of it. Adrian, not tonight, not as punishment, not temporarily. His voice was the quietest it had been in the entire conversation, which made it the most absolute. I need you to leave this house, and I need you to not come back until I call you. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? This is not a discussion. This is not something I am asking. Vivian looked at her son for a long moment. Then she looked at Elena. Elena said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that there were moments that didn't need commentary, that silence could be its own kind of statement, clean and final in a way that words rarely were. Something crossed Vivian's face when she looked at Elena. Something complicated and layered, and not entirely without pain. Not regret, not quite. Something adjacent to it, the recognition, maybe, of a thing that had been underestimated. She picked up her gloves from the table. She walked out of the room without another word. They listened to her footsteps in the corridor, deliberate and even, without hurry. They listened to the sound of the staircase, the long quiet of the upper floor. Then the front door. Not slammed, never slammed. Vivian Valenti did not slam doors, but closed with a finality that moved through the walls of the house like a vibration. Marcus exhaled slowly. Adrian had not moved from where he stood. Elena crossed the room and picked up the laptop and closed it. She set it on the side table. She straightened a painting on the wall that had been slightly off since the previous night because small wrongnesses bothered her and always had. She was aware of how ordinary these motions were, and she did them anyway, because ordinary was what the room needed, because someone needed to bring the temperature back down to something survivable. Thomas Park, she said. Don't, Adrian said. I'm not pressing it. I'm just saying the name out loud. She turned to face him. Because whatever your mother did or didn't tell him, he now has 14 months of your interest in him, and whatever window your mother gave him to work with. That's not going to resolve itself by her leaving the house. Marcus said, She's right. I know she's right, Adrian said. He was very still, the way he was still when something was costing him more than he wanted to let on. Give me an hour. Adrian? An hour, Elena. Please. She looked at him. At the cost of the last 2 hours visible in the set of his shoulders, and the particular exhausted flatness that had replaced the controlled intensity he usually carried. She looked at the man she had married, and she recognized what she was seeing, someone who had just had a fundamental structure of his life removed, not from outside, but from inside. Not by an enemy, but by the person he had trusted to want the best for him. 1 hour, she said. She left the room. Marcus followed her out, and they stood in the corridor together, the two of them, in the amber light of the east wing sconces. "How long have you known?" she asked him. Quiet, not accusatory. "Known what exactly?" Marcus said, equally quiet. "That it wasn't just about the necklace." He was quiet for a moment. "I suspected things. Over time. The pattern of certain information, certain decisions that seemed to come from outside the room." He paused. "I didn't know about the park meeting until just now. That's a different—" He stopped. "That's a significant problem." "I know." "Mrs. Valenti." He said her name the way Petrov had said it, with weight, with a kind of respect that was different from politeness. "Whatever you found, and however you found it, what you did today took considerable nerve." "It took 4 years," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Yes, I suppose it did." She left him in the corridor and went upstairs and changed out of the clothes she'd been wearing since 6 in the morning. She stood in the shower for longer than she needed to and let the hot water do what it could. She dried off and dressed and sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the gray afternoon that was already beginning to turn toward evening. She thought about Thomas Park. She thought about a meeting on Carver Street, 14 months ago, 90 minutes, a third person no one could identify. She thought about the Delano information and Marco Caruso and 12 years of loyal service ending on the basis of something fabricated. She thought about how many other things might be fabricated, how deep the architecture went, how many of the choices Adrian thought he'd made freely had been shaped by information that had passed through his mother's hands. She thought about what Park might know, what Vivian might have told him, what Park might now do with 14 months of knowledge that Adrian had been looking for him. The hour passed. She heard Adrian come upstairs. She heard him stop outside the bedroom door. She waited. He opened the door and came in without knocking because they didn't knock on each other's doors. That was a habit that had survived everything. The small, unguarded intimacy of the door just opening, the assumption of welcome. He sat in the chair near the window. He looked like he had aged somewhere in the last 60 minutes. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who didn't know his face, but Elena knew his face. "Marcus is pulling everything on Park," he said. "Everything we have. We're going in clean. No assumptions, no inherited narratives. Whatever we thought we knew, we're building it again from evidence." "Good. It's going to take time. And while we're doing it, we don't know what Park knows about us." "No. Which means we're exposed." He looked at her. "We're exposed in a way I don't have a full map of yet because I don't know what she told him. I don't know what she traded, and I don't know when it started." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I've been operating on information that I now have to assume was filtered. For potentially years. I don't know how to—" He stopped again. Elena stood and crossed to him and sat on the arm of his chair. Close. He turned toward her slightly, not away, and she put her hand on his shoulder and felt the tension in him, the coiled, exhausted weight of a man holding himself together by the last of his considerable will. "One thing at a time," she said. "Elena, one thing at a time. Not because it isn't enormous, because enormous things don't resolve by trying to hold all of them at once." She kept her hand on his shoulder. "Marcus is on Park. You've removed the interference. Whatever comes next, at least now you're getting actual information." He put his hand over hers. His hand was large and warm, and it pressed down on her hand with a weight that wasn't about possession. It was about holding on to something. "She said you were a distraction," he said. "I know." She was wrong. "I know that too." He turned and looked at her. His face, this close without the performance and the control layered over it, was the face she had fallen in love with. The one that was tired and uncertain and still working, always still working, even when the ground kept shifting under it. He said, "I should have said I believed you." "Yes," she said. "You should have. I believe you. I know." "Elena," her phone rang. Not her cell. The house line, the internal system which rang in the bedroom through the intercom panel by the door. 3 rings, then silence. The code for Petrov needing to speak with her specifically. She looked at Adrian. He looked at her. She crossed to the panel. "Petrov." His voice came through controlled and quiet, but with something underneath it that she had not heard from him before. Something careful, the way a person is careful when they're handling something that could break. "Mrs. Valenti, I think you need to come to the security office, both of you." A pause. Thomas Park left a message. He left it through the external contact system 40 minutes ago. Another pause. Briefer. He says he has information about a conversation Mrs. Valenti Sr. had with a judge, a federal judge, and he says if Mr. Valenti would like to know what was discussed, he has a proposal. Elena's hand stayed flat against the intercom panel. She heard Adrian come up behind her. She felt him reading the air in the room, the quality of what Petrov had just said, the weight of what came next. Whatever Thomas Park knew, whatever Vivian had traded, whatever conversations had happened in private rooms over the last 14 months, it was no longer contained. It had opened. It was moving. And Elena understood, standing in the bedroom of the house she had spent 4 years fighting to belong to, that the last 2 hours had not been the end of anything. They had been the beginning of something considerably larger and considerably more dangerous, and there was no version of what came next that led back to the life they'd had yesterday. They went to the security office together. Petrov was standing when they came in, which he rarely did. He was a man who used stillness as a professional tool, and standing meant something was wrong enough to override the habit. The monitor in front of him showed the external contact portal, a secure messaging system that the Valenti organization used for communications that needed to be received without being traceable back to a personal line. The message was still open on the screen. Elena read it over Adrian's shoulder. It was brief. 7 sentences. Thomas Park had a way of writing that was economical to the point of feeling clinical. No pleasantries, no preamble, just the shape of what he was offering and what he wanted in return. The message said he had recordings of 3 conversations between Vivian Valenti and federal judge Howard Crane. It said the conversations concerned the Delano family's federal exposure and the specific ways that exposure could be managed. It said Vivian had not been acting in the Valenti family's interests during these conversations. It said he was willing to share the recordings in exchange for a meeting with Adrian, in person, in a location of Park's choosing, within 48 hours. At the bottom, in a single line separated from the rest by a space, "She was building something without you. I thought you should know." Adrian read it twice. His face was the controlled surface, but Elena was standing close enough to feel the quality of his breathing change. Not much, just a fraction, just the almost imperceptible shift of a man absorbing something that landed harder than he expected. "How did he get this contact address?" Adrian said. "It's not public," Petrov said carefully, "but it's also not unknown in certain circles. It's been used for long enough that people who needed to find it have found it. Or someone gave it to him." Petrov said nothing. The implication had already been in the room before Adrian said it. Elena looked at the timestamp on the message. 40 minutes ago. Vivian had left the house approximately 55 minutes ago. The math of that landed in her chest with a specific, unpleasant weight. "She called him," Elena said, "after she left." "We don't know that," Adrian said. "The timing, I know what the timing looks like." His voice was controlled but tight at the edges. "I'm not ready to add assumptions to what is already an enormous amount of confirmed fact." Elena accepted that. She stepped back slightly and let him have the room. He turned to Petrov. "I need everything we have on Howard Crane, all of it. Whatever the organization has accumulated and whatever you can pull in the next 6 hours from open sources." He paused. "And I need to know if Crane has had any contact with our active cases. Anything in federal jurisdiction that we currently have exposure on." Petrov nodded once and turned to his equipment. Adrian looked at Marcus, who had come in quietly behind them and was standing near the door. "Get me the Caruso file, the original, before my mother reviewed it." "It may not still exist in unedited form," Marcus said. "Try." Marcus left. Adrian stood in the center of the small room and breathed. Elena watched him do it, watched the deliberate quality of it, the effort of the man to stay functional while something enormous was rearranging itself in his understanding of his own life. "Howard Crane," she said quietly. Not a question. Just saying the name into the room to hear what it sounded like. He's handled 2 federal proceedings in the last 3 years that touched Delano interests, Adrian said. His voice had gone to the flat, informational register he used when he was processing. In both cases, the outcomes were not favorable to the Delanos. I assumed we were simply not their priority. I assumed the Delano exposure was a problem they were managing badly. He stopped. If my mother was in conversation with Crane, the outcomes might not have been coincidence, Elena finished. No. And if she was managing Crane's relationship with the Delano case without your knowledge, she was also potentially managing what Crane knew about your exposure. Adrian looked at her. Say what you mean. I mean that a federal judge who has been in private conversation with your mother about the Delano family has presumably also been in conversation about you, about what he knows, about what leverage exists and in which direction. She held his gaze. Park said she wasn't acting in your interests. I believe that. But I also think the question of whose interests she was acting in is more complicated than just Vivian wanting control. The silence in the small room was dense. Thomas Park, Adrian said. What does Park want that your mother could give him? Coverage, Adrian said slowly. Protection. If Crane is in Vivian's pocket and Park has been cultivating Vivian, then Park has been building a relationship with a federal judge through a woman who has access to you and who you trusted completely. Elena let that sit. That's not a coincidence. That's a strategy. Adrian sat down. It was the first time she'd seen him sit like that. Not choosing a chair, not settling deliberately, just the body deciding it needed to be lower to the floor because the weight had increased beyond what standing could manage. He sat with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor between his feet. Elena did not fill the silence. She had learned when silence needed to be filled and when it needed to be left alone. After a long moment, he said, How long? I don't know. How long do you think? She thought about what she'd seen. The secondary monitoring system, built over time. The Caruso removal 2 years ago. The precision of the necklace accusation. Not spontaneous, chosen. The private restaurant meeting 14 months ago. I think, she said carefully, that your mother may have been in relationship with Thomas Park for considerably longer than 14 months. I think the restaurant meeting Marcus saw was not the beginning. I think it was far enough along that it was operational. Adrian looked up at her. I think, Elena continued, that you need to consider the possibility that several things you attribute to organic business difficulties over the last few years may have been managed from inside. The word managed sat in the room and did not become less terrible the longer it sat there. Adrian stood. He moved to the corner of the room farthest from the monitor and stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed, looking at nothing. Elena recognized the posture. It was the one he used when he was having a conversation with himself that he didn't want visible on his face. She turned to the monitor and looked at Park's message again. She was building something without you. Building what exactly was the question that mattered. Petrov's fingers moved across his keyboard. He pulled up Howard Crane, federal docket history, public records, the careful accumulation of a portrait built from visible data. Elena leaned over his shoulder and read as it populated. Crane was 64, 22 years on the federal bench. A record that, read cleanly, looked like a man of consistent and somewhat conservative legal principle. 2 of the 3 cases Petrov flagged immediately, both with Delano adjacency, both with outcomes that had looked like judicial bad luck for the Delano organization. In the 3rd case, filed 16 months ago, the Delano family had faced federal racketeering exposure that had seemed, at the time, potentially catastrophic. The case had been dismissed on a procedural technicality 8 months ago. Crane had written the dismissal. Elena looked at the date of the dismissal, looked at the date of the restaurant meeting Marcus had witnessed. The dismissal had come 6 months after the meeting. She felt the cold thing move through her again, deeper this time. Petrov, she said, the Delano dismissal, who benefited from it beyond the Delano family? Petrov's hands paused. He thought about it. Several parties with Delano adjacency would have had exposure through the racketeering case. If the case had proceeded, discovery could have implicated. He stopped. pulled something on the screen, read it. The Western distribution arrangement, he said slowly, which at the time was a Valenti operation, Adrian said from the corner. He had heard. He was very still. Yes, Petrov said. Elena turned and looked at Adrian. Your mother didn't protect the Delanos, she said. She protected you, without telling you she was doing it, through a federal judge, through Thomas Park. She paused, which means Park has known for at least 16 months that there is a mechanism, a federal judge, that can be applied to the Valenti family's legal exposure, and he now controls that mechanism because he controls the relationship with your mother. Adrian said nothing. He didn't come to you with information, Elena said. He came to you with a leash. The room was very quiet. Adrian crossed back to the center of the room. He looked at the message on the screen. He read Park's final line again. She was building something without you. I thought you should know. And his expression did something Elena could not name and did not want to name. He thinks I'll meet with him, Adrian said. He thinks you have to, Elena said. He's right. Adrian straightened. The control was back, more deliberately assembled than before, more visible as assembly rather than nature, but back. He has Crane. He has whatever my mother told him. He has 16 months of inside information on this organization's exposure, and he is offering me a choice between meeting him on his terms or finding out what he does with all of that when I don't. Yes, that's not a choice. No, Elena said. It isn't. The next 4 hours were the kind that Elena would not remember in sequence. She would remember them in fragments. Adrian on the phone in his study with the door closed. The low, uninflected voice she could hear as tone without words through the wall. Marcus at the dining room table with files spread across the mahogany. His face doing the careful, expressionless work of a man rebuilding a picture from the pieces. Petrov in the security office pulling thread after thread of the Crane case and the Delano dismissal and the Western distribution arrangement and placing what he found in a document that grew longer and worse with each hour. She made coffee. She brought it to Marcus without being asked because he had been awake since before dawn, and it showed. She brought a cup to Petrov. She poured one for herself and stood in the kitchen and drank it standing up, looking at the window, at the dark outside, at her own reflection in the glass. She looked tired. She was tired. The kind of tired that wasn't about sleep. She could have slept and woken up and still been carrying this particular weight because it wasn't in her body. It was in the accumulated understanding of how large the thing she was standing in the middle of actually was. She had found the necklace footage. She had done what needed to be done, step by step, careful and patient and refusing to panic. She had found the truth and placed it in Adrian's hands and watched it do what truth does when it finally lands. She had watched it break things that needed to be broken, and she had thought, standing in the garden in the gray morning, that the breaking was the worst of it. She had been wrong. The breaking had been the beginning. At 11 in the evening, Adrian came out of his study and found her in the library. She was not reading. She was sitting in the chair nearest the lamp with a book open in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, which was where her eyes went when she was thinking too hard to pretend she was doing something else. He sat on the settee across from her. He looked like the last 4 hours had taken a physical toll, not visibly, not in any way that a stranger would read. But Elena was not a stranger, and she could see it in the skin around his eyes and the way he was holding his neck. Park wants to meet tomorrow night, he said. His location. I've been given an address in the warehouse district on the south end. We're running the address now, but I don't expect it to tell us much. Park doesn't leave traceable infrastructure. You're going, Elena said. Not a question. I'm going. You can't go alone. I know. Marcus and 2 others. That's all Park will accept. He's been explicit about numbers. Elena set the book aside. Park has been planning this conversation for a long time. Everything he said in that message, the precision of it, the timing of it, that was designed. He knew about the necklace accusation. Adrian looked at her. What? Think about the timing. Your mother made the accusation. You called the family meeting. That meeting was visible. People knew it happened. Within hours of your mother leaving this house, Park sends a message. She leaned forward. He knew she'd been removed, which means he was watching, which means he has a way of monitoring what happens in this house in something close to real time. The silence that followed was a different quality again, colder, more immediate. "Someone inside the house," Adrian said, "or on it, close enough to know within the hour." He stood, crossed to the library door, came back. The restlessness was showing now, the inability to stand still when something was actively threatening and he couldn't yet act on it. "If Park has a source in this house, then the meeting tomorrow isn't a negotiation," Elena said. "It's a demonstration. He's showing you how much he has. The message, the timing, the location, it's all designed to make you walk into that room already smaller than him." Adrian stood in front of her and looked at her with the specific focus he brought to things that mattered. "What do you want me to do?" he said. "I want you to not go in smaller than him." She held his gaze. "Whatever he shows you tomorrow, whatever he has, you need to have something he doesn't expect, something that changes the geometry of the room." "Such as?" "I don't know yet, but I know that the advantage Park doesn't know you have is me. He's been watching this house. He's been watching you. He was prepared for the version of Adrian Valenti that operated inside the information your mother filtered. He was not prepared for the version of Adrian Valenti who knows what he now knows." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "You think there's something in what my mother built with Park," he said slowly. "Something she kept from him the same way she kept things from me." "I think your mother is the most controlled person I have ever watched operate," Elena said. "And I think that a woman like that, even in a relationship with someone like Park, even in a relationship built on exchange, she would not give everything. She would keep something, an exit, a piece of leverage, something she could use if the arrangement became a trap. She's been removed from this house. Yes. She's not going to help me." "No," Elena said. "She isn't, but whatever she kept from Park is still somewhere. And if I can find where she kept the necklace footage, I might be able to find what else she was storing." The library was quiet around them. The lamp threw a circle of warm light that didn't reach the corners of the room. Adrian said, "The West Wing. The room behind the reading room. The monitoring room." I looked at the equipment quickly. There were drives I didn't examine, the archive she was running. It didn't only cover the estate cameras. Some of those feeds, the ones at the bottom of the list, she stopped, thought back, tried to reconstruct what she'd seen in the 30 minutes she'd had in that room. I didn't read all the labels. I was focused on the East Corridor footage, but there were other feeds outside the house. Adrian's face changed. "She was running external surveillance," he said. "I think so." "From that room?" "Yes." He pressed his hand against his mouth for a moment. It was a gesture Elena had never seen from him before. Never, in 4 years. And it told her more than anything he could have said about how far outside the architecture of his expectations the last 12 hours had taken him. "If she has footage of the Park meetings," he said from behind his hand, "then we know what was exchanged. We know what he gave her and what she gave him. We know what he's holding and what he thinks is still hidden." Elena stood. "And we walk into that warehouse tomorrow night not smaller than him. We walk in equal." Adrian took his hand away from his face. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, the way he'd looked at her in the East Garden that morning when she held out the drive, the recalibration happening behind his eyes. "I need to go back into that room," Elena said, "tonight, before anyone else does." He was quiet for a moment. "Vivian may have remote access to the system." "I know. If she realizes we've found the monitoring room, then we need to be fast," Elena said. "I need to go now." He held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he said, "I'll come with you." They went through the West Wing together, in the dark, using the flashlight on Adrian's phone rather than turning on the corridor lights. The reading room was exactly as Elena had left it. The bookcase slightly displaced, the faint smell of lavender and old paper, the door behind it waiting. Adrian said nothing when he saw the hidden door. His jaw was tight. He watched Elena unlock it with the iron key, and he followed her through the passage into the monitoring room without a word. She sat at the monitor. She woke the system. The feeds populated. 14 cameras, the same configuration she'd found before. But now she looked at the bottom of the list, the feed she hadn't read. There were 6 of them, with labels that were not room names but initials and dates. She opened the oldest one, 3 years back, and found footage of a parking structure, a man and a woman talking beside a car. The woman was Vivienne. The man was someone Elena did not recognize. She opened the next, a restaurant, a booth near the back. Vivienne across a table from. Elena leaned forward. Thomas Park, younger by perhaps 2 years. Looking at Vivienne, the way people look at someone they are in the process of deciding whether to trust, Elena looked at the timestamp, 31 months ago. She looked at Adrian. His face had gone entirely still. 31 months, he said. His voice was barely above the minimum volume required to form words. Elena opened the next file. Another restaurant, different location. Park again. And this time there was a third person in the footage, a man who sat with his back to the camera, but whose profile, when he turned briefly to signal for the check, was visible for 4 seconds. Elena felt the bottom drop out of something in her chest. She knew that profile. She knew the angle of that jaw, the specific shape of that shoulder, the way that particular person carried his left hand when he was relaxed. She looked at Adrian. He was already looking at the screen. He had already seen it. "That's Marcus," he said. The word came out of him like something that had been waiting a long time to be said, and was worse than he had prepared for, even though some part of him, Elena could see it in the way his body had gone rigid, the way the stillness had taken on a different quality. Some part of him had already been turning toward this possibility without letting himself look directly at it. Marcus Kane. His second. 11 years. The man who had been standing in the corridor when Elena came out of the East Garden. The man who had told Adrian about the Carver Street restaurant meeting as though it was information he was sharing, not information he was managing. The man who had said, "I didn't trust the information would reach you without going through someone who might change it," which was true, Elena now understood, which was absolutely true because Marcus had been one of those someones. Adrian reached past her and stopped the footage. The screen froze on Marcus Kane's profile, caught mid-turn, 4 seconds of visibility in a restaurant booth 31 months ago, sitting across from Thomas Park and Vivienne Valenti, while he was supposed to be Adrian's most trusted man. Elena did not move. She sat in the chair in the hidden monitoring room in the dark and felt the size of it settle over her. Not just the betrayal, not just the architecture of it, but what it meant for tomorrow night. Adrian walking into Park's warehouse with Marcus Kane as one of his 2 chosen men. Marcus, who had been in this arrangement for nearly 3 years. Marcus, who knew every security protocol and every countermeasure and every contingency that the Valenti organization had built. Marcus, who would know exactly how to make sure tomorrow night went the way Park needed it to go. She turned and looked at Adrian. He was staring at the frozen frame on the monitor with the expression of a man standing in the wreckage of something he built himself, counting the damage. Unable yet to begin the calculation of what came next because the scale of it kept expanding every time he tried to find its edges. "Adrian," she said. He didn't answer immediately. "Adrian." She put her hand on his arm, felt the tension in it. Not the managed tension of earlier, but something rawer. "He knows about the meeting tomorrow. He knows the location. He knows your security plan." Adrian turned and looked at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had not slept in more than 30 hours, and who had spent those hours discovering that the people closest to him had built a room he never knew existed and lived in it for years. "I know," he said, "which means tomorrow night isn't a meeting anymore. I know. If you walk into that warehouse with Marcus, I'm not walking in with Marcus." His voice was flat and final and completely without the texture of anything except decision. "I'm not walking in at all. Not the way Park planned it." He looked at the monitor, at Marcus Kane's frozen profile. "Everything changes tonight," he said, and Elena understood, sitting in the hidden room at the center of a betrayal that had been 3 years in the making, that the woman who had come into this house 4 years ago and spent every day since trying to survive it was no longer the person this moment required. What came next was not surviving. What came next was something she had never done before, in a world she had never fully been part of, against people who had been playing this game since before she arrived. And the only thing standing between Adrian and the room Thomas Park had spent 3 years building for him was Elena, and whatever she could find in the next 18 hours, and the willingness to become something harder than she had ever let herself be. She looked at the drive in her hand. She looked at the monitor. She looked at Adrian. "Then we start now," she said. They worked through the night, not metaphorically, not in the way people say they worked through the night and mean they stayed up late and were tired in the morning. They worked from 11 in the evening until the sky outside the monitoring room's single ventilation grate began to go from black to the specific dark gray that precedes light. And in that time, they built something from the pieces Vivian had left behind without meaning to leave them. The drives in the monitoring room held 31 months of archived footage. Not continuous. The system recorded on motion trigger, which meant each file was a discrete event rather than hours of empty corridor. There were 412 files covering the 6 external feeds. Elena and Adrian went through them systematically, Adrian standing behind her chair with his hand on the back of it, both of them watching the screen in the small, cold room while the house slept around them. What they found was this: Thomas Park and Vivian had met 11 times over 31 months. The early meetings were careful, short, public locations, the body language of two people establishing the terms of something. The later meetings were longer, more private, the posture of people who had settled into an arrangement and were now operating inside it. Marcus appeared in 3 of the recorded meetings. In 2 of those, he was present from the beginning. In one, he arrived midway through, sat down, and handed Park a document that he carried in a manila folder and that the camera angle did not allow them to read. In the final recorded meeting, 8 weeks ago, a private dining room somewhere with wood-paneled walls and no visible windows, Park handed Vivian something in return. A drive. Small, black, the kind you could close your fist around. Vivian put it in her jacket pocket without looking at it, which meant she already knew what was on it, which meant it was a delivery of something agreed upon rather than something new. "She has copies," Elena said. "Of what?" "Of whatever she gave him, whatever they've been exchanging." Elena rewound to the drive handoff and paused it. "She wouldn't operate without insurance. She handed Park material, and in return she got a copy of what he has, or a copy of something that means neither of them can move against the other without cost." "Mutually assured destruction," Adrian said. "Yes, which is why Park didn't go after the organization directly, even though he had the Crane connection and Marcus inside, and 3 years of information. He couldn't move without Vivian moving first, and she—" Elena stopped. "She wouldn't move against me," Adrian said. His voice was flat. "Whatever she built with Park, whatever she decided I needed to be protected from by people I didn't know were protecting me, she wouldn't use it against me directly." "No," Elena said. "I believe that. But Park doesn't need her permission anymore. She's been removed. The arrangement has changed." Which is why the message came 40 minutes after she walked out the door. Adrian straightened. He moved away from the chair and stood in the center of the small room with his arms loose at his sides and his face doing the final assembly. The last pieces of a picture that had been building for 3 years clicking into the position where the full image was visible and undeniable and required a response. "Park has Judge Crane," he said. "He has Marcus. He has 3 years of inside information on this organization structure and exposure. He was going to use the meeting tomorrow night to demonstrate all of that and make me choose between submission and a federal case." "Yes. And now he also has Vivian outside this house, potentially willing to complete the transaction she started because the arrangement with me is broken." "Maybe," Elena said. "Or maybe Vivian is the variable Park hasn't fully calculated. She wasn't removed by him. She was removed by you. That's a different thing." Adrian looked at her. "She framed me," Elena said, "because she was trying to preserve your effectiveness. She was wrong about how to do that, catastrophically wrong. But the goal was you." She paused. "Park's goal is also you, from the opposite direction. I think that matters." He was quiet for 30 seconds, long enough that the ventilation grate above them ticked in the silence. "I need to call her," he said. "I know. She may not answer." "She'll answer," Elena said. "You're still her son." He took out his phone and left the monitoring room. Elena heard his footsteps in the passage and then the muffled quiet of the reading room as the door closed between them. She turned back to the monitor and kept working, pulling the final 2 files she hadn't examined, building the timeline in her head, trying to find the edge of what Park knew versus what he thought he knew versus what Vivian had withheld. There was a gap. She kept finding its outline without finding its content. Between 18 months ago and 12 months ago, the meeting frequency increased, 5 recorded meetings in 6 months, compared to 1 or 2 in the preceding year. Something had shifted in the arrangement. Something had been decided or offered or threatened that accelerated the pace. She pulled the files from that window and watched them in sequence. The 5th meeting in the accelerated period was the one that mattered. She almost missed it because the content was verbal and the camera was too far for audio. The system recorded video only. But the body language was unmistakable. Park was leaning forward. Vivian was leaning back. The geometry of the table between them had changed. In the earlier meetings, it had been equal, both parties occupying the space symmetrically. In this one, Vivian was pressed against the back of her chair with her arms crossed, and Park was talking at her, and she was listening with the face of a woman who was being told something she did not want to hear and could not dispute. Whatever Park had said in that meeting, Vivian had not been the dominant party. She had been the one receiving information. And from that meeting forward, the next 6 weeks of her behavior, the beginning of whatever she had begun building in anticipation, made a different kind of sense. Park had found leverage, something on Vivian specifically, something that moved the balance. Elena sat back in the chair and rubbed her face with both hands and thought. Adrian came back into the room. His face told her before he said anything. She answered, he said. What did she say? She said Park told her 6 months ago that he had documentation of a transaction from 12 years back, before I took over, when my father was still running the organization. He sat on the edge of the equipment shelf, which was not designed to be sat on, but held. A payment to a city inspector that caused a building variance approval that caused a construction project that had a structural failure. 3 people died. Elena was very still. My father authorized it, Adrian said. My mother knew. She buried it when he died, and she has been managing it for 12 years. His voice had no emotion in it that she could identify. It was entirely flat, the flatness of too much happening too fast for the emotional processing to keep pace. Park found it. He used it to accelerate the arrangement. He told her that if she completed what he was asking, the access, the information, the Crane relationship formalized in the direction he needed, the documentation would stay buried. And if she didn't, it would come out, tied not just to my father but to her, and to me as his successor. He paused. Even if I had nothing to do with it, even if I didn't know, the association alone would be enough. Elena looked at her husband, at the cost of the last several hours accumulated in his face, at the thing he was carrying that was not just the betrayal of Marcus or the architecture of Park's 3-year operation, but something older and heavier than both of those. The specific weight of discovering that the ground you've been standing on your entire life has a substructure you were never shown. She protected you, Elena said. Even this, the arrangement with Park, she entered it to protect you from what your father left. She should have told me. Yes, Elena said. She should have told you, but she didn't, and now we're here. She looked at him steadily. Does Park still have the documentation? Yes. Then it's still leverage, which means Vivian is still inside the arrangement whether she wants to be or not. She said she wants to help. She said... He stopped. Something moved through his face. She said she kept copies of everything, every meeting, every exchange. She built her own record of the arrangement from the beginning. The drive Park gave her. And more. She said she has documentation of 11 specific directives Park gave her, things he asked her to arrange, some of which she arranged, some of which she obstructed without his knowledge. He looked at Elena. She said if the arrangement goes public, Park goes down with it. Judge Crane's involvement becomes a federal investigation into Park himself. Mutually assured destruction, Elena said again. Yes, except Park has decided that destruction is acceptable now because he miscalculated. He thought removing Vivian from the house would give him a clear path to me. He didn't account for what she left behind. Elena stood. He has Marcus, and he has the warehouse meeting tonight that he thinks is still happening on his terms. Yes. Then we need to change what tonight is, she said, before Park realizes the terms have already changed. They left the monitoring room at 4:30 in the morning. They went to Adrian's study and they worked at the desk together. Adrian on the phone, Elena with Vivian's full file archive copied to a laptop they pulled from the equipment room, both of them building the shape of what needed to happen before 8 o'clock that evening. The plan that emerged was not elegant. Elegant plans had the luxury of time, and Elena knew enough by now about how things actually worked in this world to know that elegance was a feature of preparation and they had not had preparation. What they had instead was information Park didn't know they had, an asset Park thought he'd neutralized, and a window of perhaps 14 hours before Marcus Kane understood that the game had changed and communicated that to Park. They needed Marcus in the building until tonight. They needed Marcus to believe the meeting was proceeding as planned, which meant they needed Marcus to not know that Adrian had seen the monitoring footage. At 6 in the morning, Adrian called Marcus. Elena sat across the desk and listened to one side of the conversation and watched Adrian do something she had never seen him do. Perform, with perfect precision, the specific emotional state of a man processing a betrayal much smaller than the one he actually knew about. He told Marcus he'd reviewed the Park message. He said he wanted to meet tonight, and he wanted Marcus to run point on the logistics. He asked Marcus's opinion on the location, the approach, the number of men. Marcus's voice came through the phone as a tone without words from across the desk. She watched Adrian listen to it. When he hung up, he said, "He recommended 2 additional men I don't know well. He said he'd already been in contact with them. He said they were reliable." He set the phone face down on the desk. "He's been moving pieces since last night." "How long do we have?" "Until he realizes something's wrong?" "Hard to say. He'll be watching for tells. He's been watching for 3 years." "Then you give him none." "I'll give him none." He looked at her. "What about you?" "I need to go somewhere this morning," Elena said. "Alone." He looked at her. "There's a piece of this that doesn't close if we don't have Crane," she said. "Park has the judge. If tonight goes badly, if something goes wrong, Park can still trigger a federal case. We need Crane neutralized before tonight, or at minimum, we need evidence of Crane's arrangement with Park in the hands of someone who will use it if anything happens to this family." "Elena, I'm not asking permission," she said. Quiet, direct. "I'm telling you what needs to happen and that I'm the one who needs to do it. Because I don't have a role in the warehouse tonight. You'd never bring a civilian to that table, and neither would I. But I have a role in the part that happens before it." He looked at her for a long time. "Where are you going?" he said. She told him. The address she went to that morning was a law office on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district, a firm whose name appeared twice in the documents Vivian had accumulated. Not Park's lawyers, not the Valenti family lawyers. A third firm, the kind that existed in the specific space between legitimate counsel and the management of information that legitimate counsel preferred not to touch. Elena had called ahead. She had used a name, not her own, a name she'd found in Vivian's files attached to a prior arrangement, and she had been given an 11 o'clock appointment with a man named Rice. Rice was 60, small, with careful eyes behind rimless glasses, and the specific quality of someone who had spent a career knowing things and calculating exactly what they were worth. He looked at Elena when she came in with the assessment of a man who'd been expecting someone else. "You're not who I was told," he said. "No," Elena said. She sat down. She put a folder on his desk. "But what I have for you is more valuable than whoever you were expecting." She walked him through it in 40 minutes, the monitoring footage, the drive archive, the Crane documentation from Vivian's collection, and it was there, she'd found it in the final hour of her work that morning, the specific records of Crane's involvement formalized and dated and initialed in the way that Vivian Valenti did everything, with the care of a woman who never trusted that any arrangement would survive unchanged and always built a record in case she needed to walk away from it. Rice looked at the documents. He looked at them twice. He took his glasses off and cleaned them and put them back on and looked again. This is federal exposure, he said. For Crane, for Park, for... Yes, Elena said. And it will be in the hands of a federal oversight body by end of business today, unless Thomas Park and Adrian Valenti reach an agreement tonight that makes that step unnecessary. She held the man's gaze. Your job is to make sure Crane knows that before 5 o'clock. Your job is to make sure he understands that the arrangement he entered has become a liability he cannot manage. And your job is to make sure that when Park walks into that warehouse tonight, expecting a federal backstop, that backstop is no longer available to him. Rice was quiet. Why would I do this? He said. Because the alternative is that this documentation goes to oversight regardless, and your firm's name appears in 3 of the files as having received copies of material that you were therefore aware of and did not report. Elena did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the shape of what is already in motion. You can be the person who helped manage it toward a resolution, or you can be a footnote in an investigation. She left the folder on his desk and stood. 5 o'clock, she said. She left. She was back at the estate by 1 in the afternoon. The house felt different in the day, quieter, with the specific quality of a place where people were being very careful about what they showed. Petrov was in the security office. 2 of the regular household staff moved through their routines with the slightly heightened attentiveness of people who understood something significant was happening without knowing what. Marcus's car was in the east courtyard, which meant he was in the building. Elena went upstairs. She changed clothes. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself be still for 15 minutes, the way she'd learned to do in the worst years of her life. When her father was sick and the money was wrong and everything required more than she had, just still, just breathing, just letting the body do its work of continuing to function without demanding that the mind manage it at the same time. At 2 o'clock, she went to find Adrian. He was in the east garden again, the stone path between the hedgerows, the same walk as yesterday morning, but a different man moving through it. She fell into step beside him. Rice will make the call, she said. You're sure? He'll make the call. Adrian walked 3 more steps. Marcus came to me an hour ago. He told me he'd confirmed the warehouse location was clean. He told me he'd personally swept it. He paused. He looked me in the eye and told me it was safe. Elena felt the weight of that settle. 11 years, Adrian said. Yes. I promoted him twice. I gave him the Western Territory after Caruso was removed. He stopped walking. He stood in the center of the garden path with the gray November sky above him and the dead-edged hedgerows on either side, and the particular expression of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and is now deciding to put it down, not because it has gotten lighter, but because the cost of holding it has finally exceeded the cost of release. I trusted him. I know. Was there anything... He stopped, started differently. Was there anything that I missed, that I should have seen? Elena thought about it honestly. I don't know, she said. Maybe. Maybe not. People who do this for years, people who are very good at this, they don't make the kind of mistakes that are easy to see. Marcus is very good at what he does. She paused. The fact that you trusted him doesn't mean you were careless. It means he was effective. Adrian looked at her. That's a kinder answer than I deserve. It's an accurate answer, she said. Kindness and accuracy aren't mutually exclusive. He almost smiled. It was brief and partial and disappeared before it fully formed, but it was there. Tonight, he said. Tonight. I'm taking Petrov and 1 other, someone Marcus didn't recommend and doesn't know I've chosen. He paused. Petrov knows the operation. He's been with this family longer than Marcus has, and I believe he's been straight with us. He has, Elena said. He's been straight with me. I'm not going into the warehouse on Park's terms. I'm going in early, 2 hours early, before Park's people have fully positioned. With what you got from Rice's call this afternoon, Park walks into that room without the Crane safety net and without knowing I have the full archive. He paused. And without Marcus. When will you remove Marcus? At 7, 1 hour before we leave. I'll have Petrov take him in the east corridor. Quietly, nothing visible. Nobody in the house needs to see it. He'll be secured until this is done. Elena nodded. And after? After depends on what happens in the warehouse. She accepted that. It was honest. The shape of after was not something either of them could build until they knew what tonight cost. At 4 o'clock, Petrov came to find them. His face was the careful face. Elena had learned to read it by now. The micro distinctions between controlled neutral and controlled alarm. This was controlled alarm. Rice called, he said. Judge Crane did not take the call. The air in the room changed. He didn't take it, Adrian said. He was unreachable. His office said he's been in a closed session since this morning. His personal line goes to voicemail. Petrov paused. There's more. I've been monitoring Park's external contact portal for outbound traffic. There was a transmission at 3:45 this afternoon, addressed to an encrypted recipient. Marcus, Elena said. Possibly. The encryption is the same format as the original Park message. Petrov looked at Adrian directly. I think Park knows something has changed. I don't know what triggered it, but the transmission at 3:45 suggests he was communicating with someone inside the structure after whatever change he detected. The room was very quiet. Elena did the math. 3:45. She'd left Rice's office at 12:30. Rice would have made contact, or attempted to, sometime in the early afternoon. If Crane's office had flagged the contact as unusual, if someone in Crane's orbit was monitoring for exactly this kind of approach, and had communicated upward. Crane told Park, she said, or someone in Crane's office did. They flagged the approach and Park knows we have the documentation. Adrian stood very still. So Park knows we have the archive? Yes. And Marcus, if that transmission was to Marcus, Marcus knows too. The three of them stood in the study, and the weight of what had just shifted settled over the room. The plan they had built through the night and the morning and the afternoon, the precise mechanics of it, the sequencing, the advantage they'd believed they had just become something different. Not destroyed, but changed, compressed. The window collapsed from hours to something much shorter. Adrian turned to Petrov. Where is Marcus now? East Wing, Petrov said. He's been in the communications room for the last 40 minutes. Is he still there? Petrov checked his phone. A message had come in while they were talking. He looked at it, and his expression went to the place beyond controlled alarm. No, Petrov said. He's not. Adrian was already moving toward the door. The East Wing communications room was empty. The terminal Marcus had been using showed a logged-out session and a cleared cache. A deliberate wipe, fast, the work of someone who had done it before and knew exactly how long it took. The door to the east corridor stood open. The corridor was empty. Petrov moved to the security panel and pulled the camera feed. The east courtyard, empty. Marcus's car, gone. Timestamp on the departure, 4 minutes ago. Adrian stood in the middle of the empty room and looked at the cleared terminal and breathed through his nose in the slow, deliberate way he breathed when something had moved past the point of managing and into the point of responding. He's going to Park, Elena said. Yes. Tonight moves up. Park won't wait for 8 o'clock now. No. Adrian turned. His face was entirely closed, the control locked down past what she could read, the internal process running faster than his expression could track. He'll want to move before I can regroup, before I can change the approach. He looked at Petrov. How long to position for the warehouse? If we leave in the next 20 minutes, Petrov said, we arrive 45 minutes before the original meeting time, before Park's people will have expected us. But Marcus is already moving, Elena said. He'll warn Park we're coming early. Yes, Adrian said. He will. He was already moving toward the door, which means we need to be there before Marcus gets there. Adrian! Elena caught his arm. He stopped, turned. His face was very close to hers. This close she could see everything he was holding, the full cost of the last 24 hours, the exhaustion and the anger and the thing beneath both of those that was something older and quieter. The grief of a man who had discovered how much of his life had been someone else's construction. I'm coming, she said. Elena. I'm coming, she said again. Flat. Final. The tone she had found in the drawing room 2 days ago when Vivian accused her and she had refused to leave. I have the archive. I know what's in it better than anyone. If Park wants to negotiate, I am the person who knows where every piece of leverage lives. You need me in that room." He looked at her. He was going to argue. She could see the shape of the argument forming. "Park built this for 3 years using people you trusted," she said. "Every person you trusted was a variable he had calculated. I am the one variable he did not calculate. I am the one person in this he has never had a line on." She held his gaze without blinking. "That is worth something in that room. You know it is." The seconds passed. "You stay behind Petrov," he said. "Yes." "You don't speak unless I indicate." "Yes." "And if it goes wrong?" "Then it goes wrong," she said, "but it won't." They left the estate at 4:22. The city outside the gates was doing what the city always did, moving, indifferent, the ordinary machinery of a Thursday evening, proceeding without knowledge of or interest in the specific collision that was 20 minutes away in a warehouse on the south end. Elena sat in the back of the car between Adrian and the door and watched the city go past and felt her own heartbeat in her throat, steady but elevated, the body's honest report on the situation. The warehouse district was quiet at this hour. Industrial, half-occupied. The kind of neighborhood that existed in the gap between what a city had been and what it hadn't yet decided to become. The address Park had given was a building on a dead-end access road. Concrete, 2 stories, loading bays sealed with roll-down doors, no visible activity. Petrov drove past without stopping, circled the block. The second pass showed a single vehicle in the side lot. A black SUV, current plates, no visible occupants. "One car," Petrov said. "Park would have come with more than one car," Elena said. "The others are somewhere else, nearby." Petrov pulled to the curb, half a block from the access road. "If Marcus has reached Park, they've had..." He checked the time. 11 minutes. Long enough to change the setup inside. "Or to not be inside at all," Adrian said. "If Park wants to change the meeting on short notice, this location may now be a redirect." Elena looked at the black SUV in the lot. She looked at the warehouse. She thought about 11 times over 31 months, the meetings she'd watched on the monitor, the way Park moved through the footage, careful, economical, the body language of a man who never did the unnecessary thing. "He's inside," she said. Both men looked at her. "He wouldn't redirect on 40 minutes' notice. Redirecting means moving his people, moving his setup, creating exactly the kind of visible activity that draws attention. Park doesn't draw attention." She looked at the warehouse. "He changed the setup inside. He's waiting in there with a different configuration than what he planned. He wants Adrian to walk in and find something he wasn't expecting." "Then we make sure he's the one who finds something he wasn't expecting," Adrian said. Petrov looked at them both. He looked at the warehouse. He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, the exhale of a man committing to something that cannot be uncommitted. "Side entrance," he said. "Loading bay 3. It'll be unlocked. Park needs an exit option, and his people will have left it accessible." Adrian checked the weapon at his side. A motion so practiced it was barely a motion at all, just a hand moving to a specific place and confirming what was there. He looked at Elena. She looked back at him. "One thing at a time," she said. He nodded once. They got out of the car into the cold November evening, the 3 of them, and moved toward the building, and the city went on around them making its ordinary noise. And the loading bay door to bay 3 was exactly where Petrov said it would be. And it was exactly as unlocked as he'd predicted. And Adrian put his hand flat against it and looked back at Elena one more time, with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Not fear, not doubt, but the look of a man who has finally located the fight he's been heading toward and is ready to meet it. And then he pushed the door open, and they went in. The interior of the warehouse was dim, lit by work lights positioned at intervals along the upper walls, throwing pools of yellow light across a concrete floor that stretched 60 feet to the far end of the building. Wooden pallets stacked along the walls. Steel support columns at regular intervals. The smell of concrete dust and cold metal and something chemical underneath it. And at the far end of the room, in the widest pool of light, 3 men. Thomas Park stood in the center. He was smaller than Elena had expected from the footage. 5'10", lean, mid-50s, in a dark coat with his hands in his pockets, and a quality of absolute stillness that she recognized because she had seen it in this world before, in people who were completely unafraid of the situation they were in. To his right, two men she didn't know, large, positioned with the specific relaxed readiness of people who did this professionally. To his left, close enough to be within arm's reach of Park, stood Marcus Kane. Marcus looked at Adrian when they came through the door, and his face did the thing Elena had watched careful people do when they have been caught in a thing they cannot explain away. A very brief and very complete rearrangement of expression. The old face disappearing and the new face, the one without pretense, replacing it. He looked, Elena thought, almost relieved. Park looked at Elena. Not at Adrian. At Elena. He looked at her the way you look at the element of a calculation that has come out different than your math predicted. Not with anger, not with alarm, with the specific and genuine interest of a man who is adjusting in real time. Mrs. Valenti, Park said. His voice was even, unhurried, the voice of a man who had been waiting comfortably and was not surprised to no longer be waiting. I was wondering if you'd come. Adrian said, Let's talk. Park looked at him then. Something moved in his eyes. A very small recalibration, so brief it was almost imperceptible. Almost. Yes, Park said. Let's. The 60 feet of concrete floor between them and the three men at the far end of the warehouse felt both very short and very long, and Elena walked it beside Adrian with her heart doing its honest work in her chest and the full archive of 31 months of Vivian's careful documentation in the bag she carried. And she understood with a clarity that had no room for anything but itself that everything, every choice, every quiet endurance, every moment she had refused to be smaller than the thing trying to make her small, had been moving toward this concrete floor, and these work lights, and this man standing in the center of them who had spent 3 years building a room for Adrian to walk into. He had not built it for Elena. That was the only advantage she had, and she intended to use every inch of it. The 60 feet of concrete closed to 30, then 20, then the distance was gone and there was only the circle of work light and the 5 of them inside it and the rest of the warehouse falling away into dark. Adrian stopped 8 feet from Park. Petrov stopped half a step behind and to the right. Elena stopped beside Adrian and felt the cold radiating off the concrete floor through the soles of her shoes and kept her hands loose and her breathing even and her eyes on Park's face because Park's face was where the information was. Park looked at her with that same genuine interest. Up close, he was a man whose age lived in the lines around his eyes and not elsewhere. The rest of him was lean and controlled in the manner of someone who had maintained discipline as a professional necessity for so long it had become indistinguishable from nature. His coat was good wool. His shoes were clean despite the floor. He had come to this warehouse the way he went everywhere, Elena suspected, prepared to stay as long as necessary and to leave without a trace. Marcus stood to Park's left and did not look at Elena. He looked at Adrian with the expression she now understood had always been a performance. The careful, loyal attentiveness of a man who had spent 11 years being exactly what Adrian needed him to appear to be. Up close, without the performance required, he looked tired. Not guilty, not remorseful, just tired. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding 2 things at once for a very long time. The 2 men flanking Park were exactly what they looked like. They stood with their hands visible and their weight distributed and their eyes moving in the slow professional sweep of people whose job was the room and not the conversation. You came early, Park said to Adrian. I did. And you brought Mrs. Valenti. He looked at Elena again, briefly. That was not part of my invitation. My wife goes where she chooses, Adrian said. That's not a recent development. Park almost smiled. It was the expression of a man who appreciates a well-placed line even when it's aimed at him. No, he said. I understand that better now than I did yesterday. He said it looking at Elena. She held his gaze and said nothing. Marcus told me you found the monitoring room, Park said. He told me about the archive. He paused. He also told me you approached Crane. Rice approached Crane's office, Elena said. Her voice came out level, steady. She was aware of Adrian beside her, registering that she had spoken and not interrupting. Yes, Crane called me. Park's tone was informational, not angry. It created a complication I hadn't planned for. He looked at Adrian. I want you to understand that I didn't plan for your wife. I planned for the organization. I planned for what I knew of how you operated, how you made decisions, who you trusted, and why. I did not plan for someone who would walk into Vivian's private wing and find something Vivian spent 3 years hiding. Plan better, Elena said. The two flanking men shifted slightly. Petrov did not move. Park looked at Elena for a moment longer and then returned to Adrian. I have Crane, he said. Rice's approach created discomfort, but it didn't change the fundamental position. Crane's exposure is real. What I have on him is real. A phone call from a law office doesn't make it less real. No, Adrian said, it doesn't. And Marcus has been with me long enough that the operational knowledge he carries, your protocols, your communication structure, your current federal exposure, that doesn't disappear because you found the footage. No, Adrian said, it doesn't. Park was quiet for a moment. He was doing what Elena had watched him do on the monitor footage, reading the room, reading the man across from him, looking for the places where the surface and the interior didn't match. You're not afraid, Park said. Not accusatory. Curious. I'm not. You came in here with one security man and your wife against 3. Marcus told you what I have. You know about Crane. You know about the documentation on your father. Park tilted his head slightly. What do you have that I don't know about? Adrian reached back without looking, and Elena put the bag in his hand. He set it on the nearest pallet. Flat, deliberate, the way you set something down when you want the other person to know exactly what you're doing with your hands. 31 months, Adrian said. 11 meetings. Every exchange between you and my mother, recorded on a system you didn't know existed, archived on drives she kept in a room she never showed anyone. Park's face did not change, but something behind it did. A very small, very controlled adjustment. The recalibration of a man finding out the inventory he thought he had is not the complete inventory. She recorded the meetings, Park said. She recorded everything. Adrian looked at him steadily. Including the meeting where you showed her the documentation about my father and told her what you needed in exchange for keeping it buried. Including the meeting 14 months ago where the Crane arrangement was formalized. Including the meeting 8 weeks ago where you handed her a drive. He paused. We know what was on that drive. We know what she gave you to get it. We know the shape of the entire arrangement from the first meeting in the parking structure to the last one. Park was quiet. You have Crane, Adrian said. You have Marcus. You have documentation on my father that would create significant problems if it became public. He let that sit. I have a federal oversight attorney, not Rice, someone else, someone whose name you don't have, holding a complete duplicate of my mother's archive with instructions to file it with the appropriate federal body at midnight tonight, unless I send a specific communication telling them not to. The work lights hummed. Somewhere in the upper structure of the warehouse, something shifted and resettled. A building doing its ordinary business, indifferent. If you file that archive, Park said, your father's documentation goes with it. Yes, Adrian said. It does. That exposes you. It exposes my father, who is dead. Adrian's voice did not waver. It exposes my mother, who has already paid a significant price for decisions she made trying to protect this family. And it exposes me by association, which is a problem I can survive, because I had no involvement in what my father authorized, and there is no evidence suggesting otherwise. He looked at Park directly. What it also exposes is Judge Howard Crane, in detail, on federal record, and you, in detail, on federal record. And 11 years of Marcus Kane's activities as a person operating inside this organization while simultaneously working against it. Marcus shifted. It was the first time he'd moved since they'd entered the room. He shifted his weight from his right foot to his left and looked at the floor for a moment, and then back up. You've already filed it, Marcus said. Not Park. Marcus. His voice was even. The tired quality was still there, but underneath it was something Elena recognized. The sound of a man who has been in a particular tension for a very long time and has just felt it release, not because anything good has happened, but because the moment of resolution, whatever form it takes, has arrived. Adrian looked at his former second for the first time since they'd come through the door. Really looked at him. Elena watched the two men look at each other and felt the specific weight of 11 years moving through that look. The promotions, the decisions made in close rooms, the trust extended and accepted and maintained as performance. "Yes," Adrian said. "I filed it this morning." The silence after that sentence was the longest silence of the night. Park absorbed it. She could see him working through it. The chess player seeing 4 moves ahead and finding that the board had been altered while he was calculating. What he'd built was still there. The pieces were still there. But the position had changed in a way that changed what the pieces were worth. "Then we have a problem," Park said. "We have a situation," Adrian said. "A problem is something with no resolution. This has a resolution." Park looked at him. "You pull Crane out," Adrian said. "Whatever hold you have on him, whatever the mechanism, you release it. He resigns from the bench, medical reasons, personal reasons, whatever narrative you need to build. He goes quietly and stays quiet." He paused. "In return, the section of my mother's archive that documents your arrangement with Crane is sealed, not filed, not used. Sealed, with a third party holding the seal. And if I don't, then it goes to oversight tonight, and we both deal with what comes from that." Adrian's voice was entirely without threat. It was simply the factual laying out of 2 roads. You lose Crane as an asset, and you gain a federal investigation. I manage my father's legacy issue from a position of documented non-involvement. It costs both of us, but it costs you more. Park was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the bag on the pallet. He looked at Petrov, who had not moved or spoken, and whose stillness was its own kind of statement. He looked at Elena. "The documentation on his father," Park said to her directly. "Your husband is willing to risk that becoming public." "He's not risking it," Elena said. "He's accepting it as the cost of closing this." She held Park's gaze. "There's a difference. One is gambling. The other is deciding what you're willing to pay." Park looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't come here because he needed security," Park said. "No," Elena said. "You came because you wanted to see the room." "I came because I built the case that got us into this room," she said. Watching it close seemed reasonable. Something crossed Park's face. Not quite amusement, not quite respect. Something that sat in the territory between both and had the quality of genuine reaction rather than performance. He looked at Adrian. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus is not part of the resolution," Adrian said. "Marcus is a separate matter." Marcus looked up. "You came here tonight," Adrian said to him, "knowing what was in the archive, knowing I'd found the footage. You came anyway." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Where else would I go?" he said. It was not defiance. It was not self-pity. It was the statement of a man who had made a series of choices over 11 years that had led to a warehouse on a dead-end road, and who understood, with complete clarity, that the road was done. Adrian looked at his former second for 3 more seconds, then he looked away. Park said, "I'll need 48 hours to manage the Crane transition. Business for 22 years. I know when a position is untenable. I'm not sentimental about cutting losses." He looked at Marcus. Something passed between them, some communication too old and too private to read from the outside. And then Park looked away, and that was, Elena understood, the end of whatever arrangement Marcus Kane had believed was protecting him. Park nodded once to his 2 men. They moved toward the loading bay on the far side of the building. Park followed them without another word, without looking back, with the same quality of unhurried movement he had in every frame of the monitoring footage. A man whose characteristic mode was forward, eyes ahead, the past left exactly where he'd stood. The door closed behind them. The warehouse held the 3 of them, Adrian, Elena, Petrov, and Marcus Kane, who stood in the work light with his hands at his sides and his face finally, fully his own. Petrov moved toward the east lot to wait for the transfer vehicle. Adrian stood looking at Marcus. Elena stepped back. Not far. Just out of the direct line between the 2 men, into the slightly dimmer space where the work light began to thin. This moment belonged to them. She had done what she came to do. The rest of this was 11 years, and she had not been part of 11 years. "Why?" Adrian said. His voice was quiet, not the managed quiet of the earlier confrontation, something raw and less assembled. The voice of a man asking a genuine question. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the same tired evenness it had carried since they walked in. "The Western Territory," Marcus said. 3 years ago. You gave it to me, and then 6 months later you started pulling resources from it, redirecting to the South End operation. The Western book started bleeding, and I kept telling you, and you kept saying you were managing it. He paused. I had people out there. I had arrangements. People who were counting on the Western book being maintained. I was managing it. You were managing what your mother told you needed managing, Marcus said. The Western Territory was dying because Vivienne decided the South End was worth more. You didn't know that. You thought the Western decline was market pressure. You told me to hold the line. His voice was still even, but something had moved into it. Not anger, the exhaustion of something that has been held at distance for a long time moving close. I couldn't hold the line without Adrian stood where he'd been standing for the last several minutes, hands loose at his sides, looking at the door Marcus had gone through. His back was not quite straight, not collapsed, not broken, but the last degree of the posture he'd been maintaining had let go, the way posture does when the audience is gone and there's no longer any structural reason to hold it. Elena crossed the floor and stood beside him. She did not take his hand. She stood beside him the way you stand next to someone in the specific aftermath of something irreversible, present, proximate, not requiring anything. He said, "My father." "Yes," she said. "3 people died." "Yes." "Because he authorized a payment to make a number work." He was looking at the door still. "I've spent 12 years trying to run this organization differently than he did. I had principles. Specific ones. Lines I wouldn't cross." He stopped. "And the whole time, in the foundation of it, there was this." Elena thought carefully about what to say and said, "What your father did is what your father did. It has nothing to do with what you've built. It has everything to do with what I've built. The foundation is not the structure," she said. "You don't get to choose what you're built on. You choose what you build." She turned and looked at him. Every person in that room tonight, Park, Marcus, your mother, they all made choices about what they were building, and they all chose construction that required hiding something. You've spent 12 years building something you were willing to put your name on. She paused. That's the difference, not the foundation, the choices on top of it. He turned and looked at her. His face, in the work light, was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, stripped of the management and the control and the performance of capability. Just the face of a man at the end of a very long night who was looking at the person who had stood beside him through all of it. "I didn't say I believed you," he said, 2 nights ago, in the drawing room. "No," she said. "I should have led with that, before any of the rest of it." "Yes," she said. "You should have." He looked at her. "I believe you," he said. "I believed you then. I was afraid of what believing you meant, what it said about my mother, about what I'd been operating inside of. I let my fear of that make me careful in a way that cost you something I can't give back." Elena looked at her husband in the warehouse light and felt the accumulated weight of the last 4 years, every swallowed silence, every careful movement through a house that hadn't wanted her, every moment she had chosen patience over the anger she had every right to, settle differently in her body. Not gone, but rearranged. "You're right," she said. "You can't give it back, but you can make sure it doesn't happen again." "It won't," he said. She believed him. Not because the words were particularly special. People said words like that in moments like this, and words were words. She believed him because of the way he was standing, because of what he'd done in the last 24 hours with the information she'd given him, because of the specific look in his eyes, which was not the look of a man making a promise he intended to maintain. It was the look of a man who had arrived, through considerable cost, at a truth that could not be unmaintained. There was a moment of silence when she heard Elena's voice. Just a moment, just the brief recalibration. And then she said, "Elena," in a tone that Elena had never heard from her. Stripped of the precision, flattened, like something that had been under pressure for too long. "It's over," Elena said. "Park is releasing Crane. The documentation from the monitoring room is archived with a third party and will stay sealed as long as the agreement holds." She paused. "The documentation about Gerald." Vivian was quiet. "It's in Adrian's hands," Elena said. "What he does with it is his decision, but I want you to know that he is not angry at you for what you did to protect him from it. He needs time, but he's not going to use it against you." "Why are you telling me this?" Vivian said. Her voice was careful, not suspicious, just careful. The voice of a woman who had learned to receive information defensively and was not sure this moment called for that and was adjusting. "Because you need to know," Elena said, "and because Adrian is going to have a conversation with you in the next few days, and I want it to have the right conditions. I don't want you to go into it not knowing where the ground is." A silence. "You found the monitoring room," Vivian said. "Yes. I built that system over 4 years," Vivian said. "I built it because I understood that operating in this world without full information is how people die, how families fall apart. I built it because I needed to see everything." She paused. "I never thought that it would be used against you." "That it would be used by you," Vivian said. And then, after a moment, "I underestimated you." "Yes," Elena said. "You did." The silence that followed was different from the silences of the confrontation in the drawing room. It had a quality of weather, something that had passed, leaving the air changed. "The necklace," Vivian said. "You can have it back," Elena said. "It's in Adrian's study. He has it." "I don't—" Vivian stopped. "I don't want it back." "Okay." Elena, her name in Vivian's mouth, said that way, without the edge, without the implication that the syllables were uncomfortable to form, was something Elena was not prepared for. She held the phone and said nothing and waited. "I was wrong," Vivian said, "about what you were, about what you would do to this family." A pause. And in the pause was the specific sound of a woman choosing precision over comfort and paying for it. "I was not wrong about the danger this world poses. I was wrong about where it came from." Elena held that. She held it the way you hold something hot, carefully, aware of its temperature, not gripping it too hard. "I know," she said. That was all she said. She didn't offer forgiveness. It wasn't something she had rehearsed, and it wasn't something the moment required her to perform. She simply received what had been offered and let it be what it was. They said goodbye. She put the phone down and picked up the coffee, and it was cold, but she drank it anyway. The weeks that followed were not easy in the way that resolutions in stories are sometimes easy. The tying off of threads, the narrative settling into its final shape. They were the weeks of actual aftermath, which looked nothing like resolution, and a great deal like work. Adrian spent 4 days reviewing the full archive before he burned it to a single drive that he locked in the floor safe in his study. Not destroyed, kept, because keeping it was the correct strategy and Adrian was always strategic, but contained, not referred to, not opened again. He had a conversation with Vivian that lasted 3 hours in the East Garden on a Saturday afternoon 2 weeks after the warehouse. Elena did not ask what was said. Adrian told her the shape of it, that it was hard, that it was not resolved in the sense of wounds closed, but that it was honest in a way that nothing between them had been honest in a very long time, and that honesty was the only foundation any of the rest of it could be built on. Vivian moved to a house on the north side of the city, not far, not estranged, but separate, with the specific clarity of a boundary established rather than inherited. The Judge Crane transition took 19 days, a health announcement, a quiet resignation, an announcement of his replacement that carried no particular news weight. Park was as good as his word. Elena could say that about him. He honored the agreement with the flat pragmatism of a man for whom an agreement honored was simply the rational response to an untenable position. She did not admire him for it. She noted it. Marco Caruso called 3 weeks after the warehouse. He had heard, through the specific osmosis of a world where information moved through human networks at its own pace, that there had been changes. He called the main number of the estate and asked to speak with Adrian. The call lasted 11 minutes. What was said in it, Elena didn't know. What came from it, she could see. Adrian spent an afternoon on the phone and then came to find her in the library and stood in the doorway and said, "Caruso is coming back. In an advisory capacity. If he wants it." "Does he want it?" Elena asked. "He said he'd think about it," Adrian said, "which means yes." She went back to her book. The necklace sat in Adrian's study for 6 weeks. Elena didn't ask about it, and he didn't mention it. One evening, she came in to return a book to his shelf and found it gone from the desk where it had been sitting. She looked around the room and didn't see it. She didn't ask. A month later, she opened the drawer of her own nightstand for something unrelated and found it there. Just the necklace, on its chain, lying in the drawer with no note and no explanation. She picked it up and looked at it. $400,000 and the particular weight of a family's history and the centerpiece of the worst week of her life. She put it back in the drawer. She didn't wear it. She didn't throw it away. She left it there the way you leave some things, not forgotten, not displayed, just held. In a place you know about. In a place you can check, when you need to confirm that it is still contained and that you are still the one who decides what happens to it. The winter came properly in December. The estate took on the particular quality of a house in cold weather. Tighter, warmer at its core. The high ceilings that felt like space in summer, feeling like shelter now. Elena walked the east corridor without the thing that had lived in her chest for 4 years. The low-level vigilance of a person who has been told in 100 small ways that she does not fully belong to the place she is moving through. It was gone. Not dramatically. Not in the way that things leave when they have been fought over and won. In the quieter way that things leave when the conditions that produced them have simply changed. She walked past the cabinet in the east corridor, the cabinet where the necklace had not been, and she did not slow her pace or tighten her jaw or feel the old familiar assessment of her own position in the house. She walked past it and down the corridor and into Adrian's study, where he was at his desk and looked up when she came in and did not look at her with assessment or uncertainty or the particular expression of a man weighing what he sees against what he's been told. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the beginning, before the house and the family and the 4 years of Vivian's careful renovation of his perception. "Sit with me," he said. She sat in the chair across from his desk. The fire was going. A real fire, because Elena had quietly stopped maintaining the gas conversion and reinstated the wood burning, because real fires were warmer, and she had decided to make the changes she had opinions about without waiting for permission. They sat in the firelight, and the room was warm, and the house around them was quiet, and outside the window the winter was doing its ordinary business. "I've been thinking about what you said," Adrian said, "about the foundation and the structure, about what you choose to build. And I think you were right." He looked at the fire for a moment. "I also think—" He stopped, started differently. "I built this organization inside everything my father built. I accepted certain things as given, certain structures, certain relationships, certain ways of doing things, because they were there when I inherited it, and changing them would have required—" He stopped again. "Admitting they needed to change," Elena said. "Yes." He looked at her. "I'm going to change some things." "I know. It'll be disruptive. Probably." And in the end, Elena Marconi had learned, not from this house, which had tried to teach her something different entirely, but from the part of herself that had refused to be taught otherwise, that standing is not a small thing, that patience practiced without surrendering the self is not weakness, that truth, when it is found and held and carried carefully to where it needs to go, is the most durable thing a person can bring into a room. She walked the corridor of the house that was hers and felt the winter settling in around the walls, and she did not look back.